Yes, it would move me to tears if I still had tears to shed.
Welcome back to Encouraging Things. A little while ago I was watching a Dr. Toys video where he did a head swap with a Buzz Lightyear figure and a Mickey head. And he mentioned he'd gotten some kind of negative feedback for doing so. Not for any particular reason other than that the build was too easy. And I had an idea to make a figure out of a Buzz Lightyear figure as well, as I had bought a bunch of them off Amazon when they were cheap. And the one that I had was to make a Mr. Freeze. So I figured a little solidarity between builders was needed. Now this figure isn't perfect. It has a lot of flaws. The gun isn't held well. The joints are too tight. I had to sand a bunch of seam lines, mold lines. And while I do that on screen, I wanted to mention a couple of things. A lot of my past videos, when I try to do my voiceover, I'll record, and when I'm recording I don't talk. And then when I make the video, I edit it together, and then I comment on what's going on screen, as I don't have any kind of script. But I found that I'm not good at canned responses. I'm not good at just mentioning, oh, here I'm doing this, here I'm doing that. So I decided to change it up a little bit. And instead, I'm going to run the video in the background, comment on those things that are important, and for the rest of the time, I'm just going to talk. Because over the years with live streaming and making videos, I find that just having a stream of consciousness and chatting with everyone is a more natural way for me to speak. And I think that'll actually work out better for everybody in the future. The second thing I wanted to mention is the fact that my brain is strange. Everything is referenced to everything. And so for that, I wanted to do something new with this video by putting in thoughts that I had while making this build or making the edit.
Alas, poor Yorick. Where be your jibes now? Your gambols, your songs, your flashes of merriment that were wont to set the table on a roar. Not one now to mock your own grinning.
And so every once in a while you're going to see something pop up that may seem out of place, but makes perfect sense in my mind. If you like the edits, let me know in the comments. And if not, let me know in the comments. Now this is the first time I've ever worked with Sculpey, and I wasn't really certain how much I needed, and while trying to figure out scale, this popped into my mind. The other thing I wanted to mention were the black bars at the top and bottom of the screen. I had recently gotten a new camera, and this is my first build using it, and the camera was capable of operating in 4K. So for the entire build I recorded everything in 4K, without testing whether or not I could render in 4K, which it turns out I can't. So I downsampled everything to 1080p, but because of the 16:9 ratio, we get the black bars. In the future, I'm going to record everything in 1080p until I can upgrade, and then finally offer 4K video. Now, building heads for Mr. Freeze wasn't very difficult. I wanted to go with something simple. And unfortunately, the first few times I tried, even though I got close, I didn't end up with what I wanted. So let me show you what I'm going for. This is a page from Harlan Ellison's Dream Corridor. This particular page was drawn by Terry Christensen. And I like the simplicity of the lines, and how your mind has to fill in the blanks. And that's the same kind of style I was going for with my build. After a few tries, I was able to get one of the heads to work, and it fit on the model and looked really good. But when I tried to put the helmet on, it wouldn't fit. So I made another one. While looking for pieces of plastic to use for Mr. Freeze's eyes, I realized that I had accidentally made Patrick Stewart. And that got me thinking. would Patrick Stewart make a good Mr. Freeze? Personally, I think he would. I think he'd make an excellent Mr. Freeze. And while I was thinking about it, I actually figured out what his catchphrase would be. Can you guess?
Make it so.
For anybody who guessed it right, or if you believe there's a better catchphrase, let me know in the comments. I'd be happy to hear them. Going into this build, I knew that finding eyes for Mr. Freeze would be difficult. I had considered making them out of sculpey, but I didn't figure that my ability with sculpey would be good enough to make them look decent. So I started trying out different plastic parts, and I came across the knuckle joints for this final faction figure claw. Working with plastic parts at this scale, they can be very finicky. One of the things I wanted to avoid is what I call a Meriderp situation. What's a Meriderp, you might ask? Well, it's this.
Ach, lang me your lumriek and me a moose nail lee your gun away a teardrop in his eye. Hey, she back wee lassie!
That was a Merida figure that I found at the Dollar Tree one day. And as you might have noticed, her eyes don't exactly point in the same direction. When I found the figure, the irony of the fact that a bow person who was supposed to be very, very good at archery would have crossed eyes was so ironic I couldn't stop laughing. And so it is now a prized possession of mine. And every time I go to the Dollar Tree, I look at the Merida figures to find out if there's any more that look like her, and to this day I have not found a single one. For the body of the figure, there wasn't much I wanted to change. I did add a collar to the inside of the neckline in order to give it a little bit more bulk, and to show that there was something going on in there. And to make that, I just took some wire and wrapped it in heat shrink, which I did not shrink, and then used a bit of Gundam parts to hold it all together. In addition, I wanted to attach his gun to his suit to show that it was powered by his suit, and for that I took a couple pieces of wire and just strung them from the side of his suit to the base of the gun. I also used a little bit of mold magic in order to fill in a couple of the holes around the body, including the back and the side where guns would normally be holstered. And here's the figure all put together. At this point I had to stop editing the figure because I was putting the head on and taking it off again in order to test fit it, and I found that it started to crack. And instead of having the head fall apart and have to do it all over again, I decided this would be a great time to go into painting. For my Mr. Handy build, link in the corner if you haven't seen it, I decided to paint the entire thing using a dry brush technique. I base coated it with black, and then dry brushed colors over the top of each other until I got the color I wanted. And it looked really good. And it almost had an airbrush kind of design to it, look to it. And so I decided to do the same thing with this model. The brush I'm using I found at the Dollar Tree. It's a Wet n Wild makeup brush. And the reason I chose it is because the bristles are short and semi-firm. And so when I applied the paint to the body, it would drag a little bit, and it would pull that dry paint across the base coat. And it worked really well. In fact, it worked so well that this was the only brush that I used for painting on this entire model. The only other brush I used was a throwaway brush that I used for rub and buff, which you will see later. Since painting this figure is going to take a while, and I don't feel like pointing out every little detail of what I'm doing on screen, I think I'd like to tell you guys a story. It's almost a horror story, honestly. It's the scariest thing that's ever happened to me in a cold environment. Now, there have been times when I've been stranded on the side of the road. There was once I was lost in the woods, and it was snowing. But the scariest thing that ever happened to me was when I went ice skating. I've been invited out to a frozen lake by a couple of friends, and we decided to go ice skating, but there weren't enough ice skates to go around. Luckily for me, I found that my shoes were both solid enough and slippery enough to be able to push myself across the ice and slide for a little while, and I was having fun just like everybody else. Well, as happens on ice, I slipped and I fell. I didn't break anything. I was fine. But I landed on my side with my right arm extended fully above my head. And out of the corner of my eye, I saw one of my friends coming towards me. Not menacingly, they just happened to be going in that direction when I fell. Except they were wearing ice skates, and my flailing phalanges were right in the path of their blades. And in a moment of caveman logic, without realizing what I was saying, I curled my entire body into a ball, just in time for that skate to slide across where my fingers had been. And I realized to this day that if I hadn't had that moment of clarity to pull my hand in, I would have no fingers on my right hand. I don't know how I would have gone through life like that. I'm sure I would have managed. And with prosthetics these days, I'd probably have a really cool fake hand. But being able to make things like this, being able to type, to do a job, especially with my dominant hand, is a lot nicer than having a cool fake hand, I think. What about you? Do you have any scary stories about the ice? Or fun stories? I'd love to hear them. Let me know down in the comments. While working on this figure, I remembered that there was actually another actor that I wanted to see in a Batman film. And that actually is Jim Carrey. Now I know, Jim Carrey was already the Riddler in Batman Forever. And in fact, I would love to see Jim Carrey play the Riddler again. But not a 1990s comic book rendition of the Riddler. I'd like to see him play something more serious. You know, this Jim Carrey versus this Jim Carrey. So how did it turn out? I think for my first time using Sculpey, and for my first time ever sculpting a human head, it turned out rather well. I also really enjoy the fact that the dry brushing technique that I found on my previous build worked so well on this one, and again, it's something I'd like to continue doing into the future until it fails me and I have to change up. On that same note, I wanted to point out that on this channel, I always want to encourage people to do something, anything, whether you're good at it or you're not, whether it's new or it's not, whether you've done it before and failed and are worried about picking it up again. I always want people to know that trying is the important part. So for you watching this video, and for anyone else who happens to stop by, as always, I want to encourage you to do something new, to do something different, or to do the same thing over and over again until you get good at it. But no matter what you do, take pride in the fact that you did something. And for now, as always, I want to thank you very much for stopping by, and I'll see you next time.
Think of it, Batman. To never again walk on a summer's day with a hot wind in your face and a warm hand to hold. Oh yes, I'd kill for that.